Hi, everyone. I am going to cover mental health and college applications and how to broach the topic of your mental health on college applications. Although never a requirement to discuss your mental health on your college application, some students, however, do want to address it. I want to be able to provide some guidance on how to go about it. I'm Miss Yu, support counselor at Amador Valley High School, and so I do work with a number of students in support of their mental health. And so sometimes by senior year, they're applying to colleges and they do have a few questions on how to broach the topic. I recently attended a great UC conference workshop where UC admission counselors talked about opening up about mental health in college applications. I want to share the information I learned from the workshop with students. I do want to put a disclaimer though. This information is from a workshop hosted by University of California admission counselors. So I will mainly cover the UC application specifically. But most college admissions operate similarly, where they look at students and their context. And your struggles and the obstacles you face is totally part of that context. Here are a list of common mental health topics that the UC admission counselors had shared. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but they commonly see ADHD, anxiety disorders, depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, and struggles with communication. The UC admissions readers use a process called comprehensive review. And so these application evaluators look at multiple factors beyond courses and grades to evaluate each applicant's academic achievements. And so some of them include GPA, the courses you took beyond the minimum AGG requirements, honors courses, opportunities that you've taken relative to high school opportunities available to you, talents and awards, and look at your accomplishments in light of special circumstances and challenges. Students' mental health challenges can have an impact on all of these, and UC's understood this. Here are the mental health trends in the UC application. Academic performance, whether it's an upward or a downward trend in the student's timeline. Burnout, noticing there's a lack of activity or awards or inconsistency in their attendance. Trauma dumping, it's where students or applicants overshare all the things that's been happening to the student. And so the admissions evaluators have to sort of work on gleaning the most important parts to understand who the student is and where you're coming from. And then lastly, COVID pandemic. As we all know, students were very much impacted by COVID, and students are still very much being impacted by it. So on the application, there is the activities and awards section. And so this is often used for students to provide context. Students can add up to 20 in this section, up to 350 characters per description. And so students often use this section to really hone in on what type of applicant they are. You're used to provide context to the reader. What does each award entail? And what is the level of award? Also, the time commitment. How long were you involved in this activity? Or how long have you worked towards working towards this award? So best practice, if there has been a lack of opportunity to be in a structured group or activity, it might be important to address what prevented you from being in a group. Perhaps the student was part of a support group or counseling. It could potentially be an activity that you add. You want to make sure you add why you were part of it. Were you participating in it, or were you the one leading it? Also, honors and awards earned for success in overcoming or working through mental health triggers could also be a potential activity to add. Here is a case study example that the UC workshop had shared with us. So this applicant is a group member of the SAFE Alliance. They met weekly with mentor and fellow peers to increase emotional regulation and communication skills, identify qualities of healthy relationships, challenge unhealthy gender norms, learn skills for supportive relationships, and experience a sense of belonging and connection. And so this student had done it during the 12th grade school year, about 2 hours per week and about 8 weeks per year. And so, this could be an example of a student addressing their mental health in their activities and award section. However, the feedback that the UC admissions counselors has shared that we always want to make sure we spell out acronyms, right? Although SAFE we can kind of make assumptions or have an idea of what this SAFE Alliance is about. It's always important to spell out any acronyms. And also, what does being a group member entail? What do group members of the SAFE Alliance do? It does provide a pretty good mission statement, but it doesn't really provide context on why you got involved during senior year and how it helped them, right? It almost felt like this applicant took the mission statement and copied it and pasted it on the UC application. It doesn't really address, what led up to you participating in this? How did you participating in this impacted you? And so it would be really helpful if you can add some more details there. This example also highlights that group therapy or individual therapy could be a big part of your life outside of the classroom. And so we want to share that with students that it can be added as part of your activities. If you are noting that you participate in a group or individual therapy, you should make it clear, how many hours per week and how many weeks per year. Was counseling self-selected or was it assigned as a task? Context here really matters. And then there are the personal insight questions on the UC application. Any response can be used to highlight mental health struggles. However, it's super important that all your responses need to remain in the scope of the question asked. So don't get lost in the mental health concern. Make sure you're still addressing the personal insight question. Best practice is for the PIQs, for the personal insight questions, you can sort of, again, use this to add more information. Maybe you brought up activities or an award in the activities and award section, but you want to maybe go into more detailed and when you're addressing one of the personal insight questions. Disclosure what context and how you're working through it. The UC admissions counselor really emphasized that, to avoid trauma dumping, where we're listing all the things that maybe are going wrong or that we're struggling with, it's also super important that we provide context on how you're working through it. Even if you haven't gotten to the other side, right? Because imagine most mental health struggles are a long journey. How are you working through it? The UC application readers would very much like to know. Here are some case studies that the UC admission counselors shared. Example 1, for the personal insight question about academic subjects that inspire. Student writes about being in hospitals frequently due to mother's illness, mentions that they were inspired to take AP biology and a health course at a local community college. It driven the student to learn about healthcare advancements and to help future patients of their own. And the feedback that the UC admissions counselors had shared was that, admissions reader can most likely read this PIQ and empathize, but it didn't really tell us anything about the stress or how the student felt during that time. And so it did talk about it did respond to the PIQ, right? It talked about an academic subject that inspired them. However, it didn't really address the mental health piece. So if the student's goal was to bring up and broach the topic of mental health, this example didn't do a very good job of it. And so again, the UC admissions counselor really stressed that when they're reading these applications, they're not allowed to make assumptions. They're not able to fill in these blanks. And so it's super important that our applicants are making sure they're being very explicit about, when you've been in the hospitals frequently due to your mother's illness, like how did that impact you? Example 2, this addresses the greatest talent or skill PIQ. So the applicant has been able to balance a full course load and part-time employment to supplement family expenses. At work, they were only trained to help in prep of food items, but they took initiative to learn all aspects of business operation. Their greatest skill is the ability to learn and master new skills. Again, the feedback provided by the UC admissions counselors was that, I wonder how much of the family expenses they had to supplement. Did the family ask the student to help with the financial burden, or did the student take the initiative to? If a student wants to convey that this had caused stress, then the goal isn't really met here, right? Again, the UC application readers, they can't make assumptions here. And so it does need to be explicitly stated and more context needs to be provided if we are hoping to address the mental health piece of how this has impacted your mental health. It does address the PIQ, however, it doesn't really do a good job of addressing the mental health piece. And so more case studies. So example 3, most significant challenge. Applicant discloses struggle with a mental health diagnosis due to strict upbringing. Grades and activities in 10th grade felt like they were slipping due to the depressed state the student was in. School counselor became a mentor to student and encouraging them to get help, and grades improved by 11th. And so the feedback from the UC admissions counselor is that, hey, I'm hearing from the student that support was received and the student feels like they're kind of getting to the other side of it. Readers do not need to make assumptions here. The application readers, the evaluators, they don't need to make assumptions here. It's explicitly stated that, hey, the student really did struggle in 10th grade, but the student met their goal of, letting us know about their mental health concerns and issues. And so this is a really, the UC admissions counselor said that this is a great example of addressing the PIQ and also addressing your mental health. Here is example 4, where it answers the PIQ about making your community a better place. Applicant was a recent immigrant and was afraid to talk to people until they were welcomed by a church youth group. Group offer friendship and community that help them make adjustments to life in America. They are now able to invite other recent immigrants into the same environment as they adjust in their new community. Again, one of the big things that the UC admissions counselors mentioned about this example is that we can't make assumptions. So we can't, whoever's reading the application, we can't assume that they struggled with this because it really wasn't disclosed by the applicant as far as like, well, they're a recent immigrant, but it really didn't address maybe the struggles that they face when they were a recent immigrant. And so it does need to be explicitly stated. And so again, this example, although it does address the PIQ, it doesn't really touch on the mental health piece. And so that was addressing the mental health in the PIQs. There are also 2 spots in the UC application for additional comments. One spot is within the academic history section where there's a 550 character limit. And there's also an additional comment section in the PIQs, which has like a 550 word limit. And again, UC definitely stressed, this is not a spot to answer like a 5th PIQ question. It's not a spot for you to continue on from another PIQ. It's really meant for, again, students to use this section as a way to add any additional information to the application that they didn't get a chance to add before. For the academic history section, perhaps sharing things like how the transition to remote learning has affected the student. Maybe there were special grading practices at school. For the PIQ section, reflect on the application process as a whole. What was not asked of you that you can provide helpful context? A good question to kind of ask yourself, has anything that you want to say been left unsaid? Certainly, additional comments is not a required section. You can certainly leave it blank. But for those that perhaps are looking to address their mental health, additional comment sections can come in handy. Here is a case study that our UC admissions counselor shared. Student explains how their 10th grade grades were negatively impacted by loss of a loved one and their struggle with the loss over a 6-month period of anxiety. They mentioned being able to make up most of those grades with a strong junior year after a successful round of mental health treatment. Again, keep in mind, application readers cannot make assumptions, so it helps students when they provide context and share this. And so if this was added into an additional comments in the academic history section, the application reader will have an idea of like, oh, kind of explains the timeline, why maybe there was a dip in grades during 10th grade year. And so this provides that additional context. Here are some general tips that the UC admissions counselor share. Make sure that the particular topic you're talking about answers a personal insight question or explain why this is shared within the additional comment section, right? Although there are additional comment sections to be used, we want to make sure we're using it wisely. UCs also have mandated reporters as part of their application readers, so they will escalate situations when needed. And also wording matters, especially when there's such a small assigned space. You want to maximize wording, but also meanwhile giving proper context. As readers, they cannot infer or draw conclusions, so it's so important that a student clearly makes the connections themselves. If they want us to know something and how it affected them, they need to state it. And of course, be as concise as possible. There was a lot of discussion at the workshop about trauma dumping. Trauma dumping is more about sharing information without setting up how it has impacted the student. You're kind of going into the nitty-gritty, you're sharing a lot of the details about what's going wrong, and you're building up in a story. How the UC admissions counselor kind of showed us, it feels like you're gossiping what's happening, and rather than really addressing it in a professional manner and addressing how to overcome it. And so keep in mind, there's limited space, so going into all the details really is just a waste of space. How do you overcome it? And how do you make sure that you're sharing with the admission reader, like, well, how will we do well on their campus? Okay. And so if we're talking about group therapy or individual therapy, how did you get help? Were we being proactive? Certainly it doesn't have to be a resolution, because sometimes, it's a lifelong journey, but it's about making sure colleges see a light in the student's story. And so there really isn't a whole lot of real estate on the application for oversharing. So keep it concise. And this is a quote that I wanted to make sure I include. This is a UC admission counselor saying, we always err on the side of the student. Anything a student shares can only help them, not hurt or be used against them. We do not judge students in a negative light if they talk about their struggles. The purpose of disclosing mental health struggles is to give context. And there are areas on the application where you can provide context. If there's a dip in grades or if there's been a dip in any, involvement, having that context can help them to learn why. Additionally, if a student has overcome certain challenges, that helps them to learn about the student's process of overcoming hardship. Lastly, thank you. Reach out to your counselor if you have any questions. I know this video is really just a quick information dump for how students can address their mental health. But if you have any questions whatsoever, please reach out to your counselor, and good luck on your applications. And I want to leave you with this quote: mental health problems don't define